Amazing. Thank you so much, Adrian, and thank you all for coming. We have a cool little panel discussion that we put together today. Like Adrian said, it's been about maybe 10 days or so since everyone wrapped Expo. And because it was a particularly busy time out there with all the news coming out of SVB, we thought it was a nice opportunity to take a step back. And, while we will talk a bit about that, just because we have to just talk more broadly, really focus in on the industry and sort of cut through the noise. So what we'll do is let's have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll hop right into it. Do you want to start and kick us off, David?
Yeah. How you guys doing? I'm David Ackerman, CEO and founder of CalNutri.
Garry?
Hey, I am Garry Michael. I am the founder and CEO of Farm to Me, a pretty large brand network of emerging food and beverage brands.
Awesome. Hey guys, I'm Kunal Kohli. I'm the head of CS here at AMPLA. We are a financial solution platform for consumer brands, primarily offering working capital and banking solutions.
And you were a former founder as well.
That I was. I was also a former founder of a food brand called Boo that we exited a little over a year ago.
Amazing. So just to start things off and sort of set the mood for those that weren't there, it feels like for both Expo West and South by Southwest, if any of you were there, this was sort of the first big return post-pandemic. For those of us that were on the ground, can you sort of like describe the mood and what was the sentiment? How were folks feeling? What was sort of the temperature check?
It was definitely, in my opinion, more positive, more vibrant, more personable. I mean, especially without the mask. I mean, it was just more personable. That's how I would sum it up. There was more of a buzz. It was great to actually see faces, and of course the attendance was outstanding.
Yeah, I've been going to this show now for 7-8 years. I've exhibited 2 or 3 times. I've walked the show the rest of the times, and obviously, people like being back in person, meeting friends and everyone that they normally are chatting with, either online or through LinkedIn. So it's always great to be back at these shows and see all the great products out there.
Was there any, in terms of like the general mood around sort of the macro, was that sort of something that you guys felt was sort of looming around, or was there general optimism? Obviously coming out of COVID, everyone's happy to be joining again, but outside of that, just sort of the pressures that we've been seeing on the market overall, any sort of anecdotes that you can share from folks as it relates to the overall sentiment around on the business in the category?
Garry, you want to start off with that one?
I know that a lot of brands this year, like you mentioned, they returned to the expo. I know a lot of smaller producers were actually walking the show, and there was a lot of community just amongst folks introducing themselves. Just walking the show, talking to maybe investors or buyers, or just kind of getting like a feel for what kind of response they were getting for their products. What was the second part of your question, Mike?
There's generally like how folks were feeling, given the macro. Was there sort of apprehension? Was there sort of optimism around sort of what's happening next? All that stuff.
Yeah, I think folks are really excited. Of course, like there was that underlying kind of like stress effect for a lot of the brands. I don't think many of them were talking about what happened with SVB and the smaller community banks until the festival was over. But I can assure you that a lot of them were feeling the burn. I personally didn't talk to any investors at that time, but I would say that overall mood was really positive. Brands are kind of buckling down on some of their savings. There's a lot of talk about cross collaboration between brands, and a lot of community that was kind of like building around that for sure. That's the vibe I was getting.
And maybe I didn't notice this last year, but definitely noticed it this year that there were a lot more retailers walking around and actually stopping and talking to a lot of these brands, which, being an exhibitor in the past, I will say I'll never want to exhibit again, but that it was great to see that, right? That you have these buyers like Target and Whole Foods and Kroger that are actually showing genuine interest in these brands and the products that they're launching, because listen, we all know that there's a lot of time, prep, and money that goes into these shows. And the ultimate goal is to be able to get placement of these new products and everything you've devoted towards it. So even when, I was walking and, meeting a lot of our customers, and I saw some of these buyers come by, I immediately was like, guys, great, like, have these conversations, and then, we can catch up later. So it was really cool to see the buyers really making an effort and actually talking to a lot of these brands.
Yeah, I think around those lines, I'd love to sort of dig in a bit more around distribution, because obviously we've seen over the last probably 18 months or so. I mean, food and bev has always been a particularly heavy wholesale and distribution based channel, but for a long time, there was a lot of emphasis on direct and e-commerce. How are you guys seeing brands like tackle that atmosphere? Like, are we leaning into, Garry, you guys have a marketplace model. Do you see that being a bigger piece of the pie, drawing away from direct to consumer? How is wholesale and the big distributors like UNFI still, playing a huge role in the space? Any color you can give around that would be helpful.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to tackle that first?
Well, I'll attack it from a supply chain standpoint. Our team, as we help various brands, we definitely have seen more brands focus on direct to consumer, D2C, without a doubt. Obviously, if you want to play the Amazon game, you got to keep your inventory levels up, or you're going to get deprioritized, if you will. That's something that I know our team has definitely helped the brands that we've worked with as they gear up to go beyond just their e-commerce website and start venturing off into various sales channels.
Yeah, and I'd add to that and say that, diversification is a big piece here. I think there's like two sides to that. One is, you might want to work with some small regional grocers and community markets that are emerging. Larger ones, of course, everyone knows about are like the Green Zebras and the Foxtrots and the Erewhons. But there's a lot of smaller players. Pop-Up Grocer just launched in New York. There are regional players from Maine to Alaska that are emerging in small communities, and you need distribution partners in order to be able to get your products there quickly in an efficient way and in a cost-efficient way, meaning you can route orders from your Shopify or route orders from your brokers to your partner. So we're seeing a lot of changes there. Of course, like the typical players, the Shipmonks, the Ship Bobs and the and players like that. Trying to think, I have so many things in my mind, Settles and other platforms like that. But there's also regional players. Nice Commerce is starting to come out with their own model of pick and pack. There's databases emerging out. There are, I know we have one on our site to be able to find these 3PL partners, to be able to find these pick and pack partners across the US, whether you're refrigerated or frozen, zero, or you just need somebody to store your shelf stable product. It's never been easier to find partners. And I think what on the software side, like there's players out there now, like, I'm sorry for throwing all these names out, but these are just brands that like are coming to me. FlexPoint is one, Convictional is another, Jetty is another one, Nautical Commerce. They're basically these platforms that are allowing you to take your orders and then automatically route them based on wherever your customer is, whether it's D2C or whether it's wholesale. And that means that routing your order in the sense that like it shoots it to that distributor partner. So as a small pack, CPG brand, you really need to start thinking about that. It'll help you reduce your costs in the long run and prepare you for scale. And then I think the other thing to touch on here is also like, you can't just go to a partner, you need to find and figure out your packaging. So there are some really great, packaging partners. I think Dave, you handle some of that stuff. He's a great resource. There's other folks that are on Farm to Me's network that also can help with, packaging, whether it's pre-pack or three, or wholesale or pick and pack.
And I think what we're kind of seeing from like this post-COVID kind of world also is a lot of these like brands that call it, were born D2C, understand that they need to embrace kind of the retail wholesale channel. So you're seeing them become more omni-channel. A lot of our customers that, were primarily D2C actually used Expo West as a way to get in front of these buyers, right? And just like Garry was mentioning, in order to be successful in an omnichannel world, you need to have the right partners to be able to, pick, pack, ship these products, storing them also. Same thing with the packaging. What you're selling online may not be viable for what you can go and sell, in store or on shelf. So you're definitely seeing a lot of kind of like these brands venturing out into kind of a different type of world, which is, necessary for them to have the right partners on board to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. As it relates to sort of trends from the product standpoint, and David, this is probably something you can speak to specifically, like what are the big, what's in and what's out? Obviously, natural foods is sort of the theme of the overall conference, but there's so many subsegments within that. Can you give us a sense of, sort of what's been the new trend this year, and then what have you seen sort of wane in popularity?
Yeah, good question. A show like Expo West, which by the way is probably the biggest show that our team attends, it's not only great just to meet with customers, various brands that we're helping out, but even more so, just to stay connected with supply chain. And so as I cruised around the various aisles, not only was I looking to connect with existing and even potential future supply chain partners, but customers, packaging material suppliers, et cetera. But to answer your question, mushrooms. If I had to think off the top of my head, mushrooms were big. Collagen is still a thing. What I call functional health, is still trending. Brain health, whether it's for cognition, focus, relaxation, gut health. I know that started trending maybe a couple of years ago, but that's still strong in my opinion. And then probably plant-based foods still continue to just make a rise, especially in the new products. For example, I'm personally trying to phase out bacon, and I think I found an alternate bacon, and plant-based bacon that actually tasted decent. And just in general, I know this is a vague category, but shelf-stable products. I know this is going to sound generic, but just in a world of some uncertainty and some weird things going on internationally right now, just shelf-stable products just still continues to be a thing. So, as far as what's out, I don't want to say like CBD infused type products, but that is something that just it's not gone, because actually our team, we have in the queue a lot of CBD infused type projects right now that we're actually vetting and working on. Yeah, energy drinks, that's never going to go away, but like there just aren't, it doesn't seem as saturated as it used to be. Those are probably two things that come to mind as far as what's out, if you will. So yeah.
Yeah, I would say like for me, like kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, we're kind of close, but like, food as medicine, right? So a lot of like gut health, those types of foods and drinks, and then also like healthy indulgence, right? It's actually a great customer of ours, Ryan, they had like, I think it was like a pina colada mix, trail mix type of thing, which was, it was awesome. I was like, wow, I felt like I was on a beach, and like also like pizza cupcake, a lot of, great tasting food that is, it's healthier. It's better for you than other options out there. I think Belgian boys was going crazy with like their mini pancakes and everything. And those were, fantastic as well. So it was just kind of great to see that like a lot of the brands are starting to focus on like, hey, listen, there's indulgence piece, and you can definitely make the indulgence piece better than the other offerings that are out there. And then also being able to utilize food and beverage as a way to be healthy, right? Like gut health and probiotics and all that stuff. And then not gonna lie, you're gonna see just liquid death on every single corner. And I think every single bar that we went to, the water that was being served was liquid death. So it's cool to see that too.
Yeah, I'd like to take a stab at it. So I'd like to kind of add to Dave's thought earlier when you were starting to talk about like kind of like adaptogens being out or CBD being out. I definitely would agree, speaking to Gen Z for the past 3 years on Clubhouse, speaking to them that are launching brands now, I think what we've realized is that like this pitch towards like brain health, gut health, with like random adaptogens and random, proteins and fats and additives that are being kind of like added to these products are kind of a thing of the past. I think what we're seeing now is, brand collaborations with smaller brands, brand collaborations with the brands that are focused on the ingredient first. So, on top of mushroom, I would also add kelp and seaweed is number one, I think, in my mind. On the supply chain, I always think about supply chain because I've been in this game for 12 years. I know how hard it is as a brand to like source ingredients. And so for me, I don't want to throw something out that like is difficult to find. But I do know that seaweed production is increasing. It's all over the New York Times now. There's, investments in North Carolina and New York and Connecticut and California and Hawaii in states all over the country. So, and internationally. So that's a big one. I also think like Gen Z brands are focusing on ingredients. So emerging ingredients instead of like, some brands are doing this, like they're creating a new product launch. Like Tepache was one brand that's been on my mind. They're a brand that does agua fresca, I think it's agua fresca, and they create a cocktail line in time for the event. I think it's cool and it's a gimmick and it's fun, and it opens them up to like the alcohol space. But I think at the end of the day, what people are more excited about, not necessarily like a new product line, a new type of chip, or a new type of beverage. It's really about like what kind of ingredients are going into the product. Kunal, you mentioned a really good point, and that was, when we talk about, the ingredients that are going into the product, are they emerging granola? Are they emerging trail mixes? Meaning like, are they using new ingredients for the first time? Like not another gluten-free or another grain-free product that's been done by, brands like Beef Free Warrior Mix since 2009. We're talking about like a new, red walnut or a new pistachio varietal or whatever it is, like ingredients, thinking about like spices even, brands like Diaspora that are working with like, Indian spice supply chains, brands like Pak Spice working with West African spice supply chain and farmers in those regions. Those kinds of products, collaborating with brands like Burlap and Barrel, which traditionally have done spices, now working with some of these smaller supply chain brands and ingredients. That's where I see the industry going, and I'm really excited to see where some of these bigger, CPG brands that have been around for 10 years start collaborating with some of these new ingredients in the markets, start talking about that and the impact of emerging ingredients in the industry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think leads nicely to my next question. Obviously, so I come from a textile background. I had a textile business. And so that, from the sourcing standpoint, tends to be more concentrated than the F&B space, which can be quite fragmented, but has still been sort of shaken up by the supply chain, by supply chain disruptions. Are you seeing any trends in terms of where items are being sourced, any movement out of certain markets into new ones? For example, like I've seen a lot on the textile side of, folks looking to diversify away from China in places like Bangladesh and even Mexico. Is there any sort of like direct correlation in the F&B space that you can see?
Yeah, without a doubt, with respect to just global supply chain in general. And actually, back to the question, like what was the vibe like at Expo West? Really the only tension, if you will, that I noticed not only at Expo West, but the Southern California IFT Suppliers Night, which was another event that I attended while I was there, was just the uncertainty of global supply chain in general, if you will. Again, our team, that's probably our biggest strength, is helping these brands that are emerging or just starting, trying to establish their supply chain. We've noticed that even the more established brands, they're definitely just trying to source domestically as much as possible. But let's be honest, the reality is, especially when it comes to like vitamins and minerals and amino acids and et cetera, I mean, like a lot of those ingredients are being imported. So the next best thing is just trying to align with a credible distributor, if you will, and that's definitely something that we've helped a lot of our brands as they get on their feet with, and that is that supply chain establishment, not only I'm not saying that we're trying to persuade our brand to get away from imported ingredients, because you can't. But as far as from a source sustainability standpoint goes, just trying to find even distributors that are going to stock these ingredients and always having a second qualified ingredient with respect to redundancy established. So supply chain definitely was a huge theme as well at Expo West.
Yeah, I definitely saw a lot of like upcycled initiatives as well. And not just, you know, in the smaller brands, but you're also seeing that kind of trend come through with some of the bigger brands as well. And again, David, to your point, like sustainable sourcing too. So I can't speak too much of kind of where a lot of these ingredients, everything are coming from, but a lot of these brands are focusing on is more sustainability and upcycling initiatives, which obviously can help, you know, not only their cost margins, all that stuff, but kind of even with the vendors, suppliers, farmers that they're working with as well.
Yeah, and packaging supply too. I think like from my perspective, I think the hardest thing for brands over the past 3 years has been finding packaging, jars, bags, pouches, boxes. Nothing worse than not being able to take an order. There have been many instances where I'm not going to list who they are, but we worked with brands, and I'd say about 30% of them weren't able to fulfill, and it had something to do with their packaging. You know, partners like Dave, I know we have a big database, and you can reach out as well. They have a larger database of suppliers, both on the ingredient side as well as on the packaging side. I know as a small batch brand, you may say, hey, I don't have the budget, or I don't know how much it's going to cost. There's no cost to finding out. There's no cost in doing your homework. We had a brand that's in Hudson Valley, not particularly the most wealthy part of the country. Small batch brand, maybe serving a couple counties in upstate New York. She reached out skeptically. You know, we gave her a 10% discount on any of the partners. We don't make money on this stuff, so it's any of the 10% discount on any of the partners they wanted to talk to. We introduced her to all boxes. We introduced her to Harry Wrap, which does stuff with UPS and FedEx. She ended up saving a lot of money. Just talking to them, she probably saved, I don't know, 300 hours of her time, maybe 500 hours of her time. That costs money. And they're going to give her, you know, people like Dave are going to give a really good quality product. So sometimes like having that partner with a really large network, being able to be a resource to you, having 3-4 generations of experience, being able to negotiate and give you those 10% off through partnerships. I don't know if Dave, you offer anything like that with your network. I know you get 10% off anyone that we refer, and they're not marking up those prices. So I think that there's a value to like working with larger networks, larger databases. Join like a startup community if you can. Always a good idea. I don't know if you're getting a discount there or not, but another thing I want to say is like, you know, talking to brands that exited out over the past 10 years or 12 years. One in particular that I think of all the time. There's others is Nibmore Chocolate. I know that was around when I was a kid. Heather Terry's, you know, back at it again. This time she's really tackling it from the perspective of the ingredients. So macadamia nuts, the cacao, the salt that she's using. And she's going to West Africa, she's going to South Central America, and she's working with these supply chain partners that again have these massive networks. And then by consolidating, she has a larger network. Right now she's tackling, you know, nuts and things like cacao. But you know, ultimately I see a lot of different brands in the space that are starting to build up these like supply chains. Kunal, like to your example, like they're trying to consolidate and make them larger so that we don't have to worry. So it's not as decentralized as it once was.
Very cool. Yeah, super complex issue, particularly when ingredients are so distributed all over the world. I'd be remiss as a sort of a fintech company to not talk a little bit about what happened from a banking standpoint, but then I think more broadly, just the financials that are underpinning these businesses. This is maybe a bit for Kunal, but also for the folks on the panel, like in terms of how brands are dealing and shoring up finances, given a lot of the uncertainty, you know, from margin compression to waning demand, what are we seeing across our portfolio? And then beyond that, like what did you see on the ground from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think it's an exercise that is constantly still in play. Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, with A lot of these brands, the access to, equity capital is kind of, I'm not going to say dry, but it's not as easy as it once was before. And a lot of these brands that, were operating on a lower margin to begin with are feeling a lot more of those pressures now, right? Because they don't have easy access to equity capital on top of working capital. And then what they, I will say a lot of the smart brands are doing is that they're actually slowing down their growth. While a lot of them do want to continue to put their foot on the gas and, constantly increase their top line, a lot more of that bottom line management is starting to come into play, which we applaud, right? Because in order to build a business or build a healthy business, it always comes down to your profitability or how you can actually get on a realistic path to profitability without having to raise more capital. And I think that the whole kind of SVB meltdown really, put a lot of, attention and really, the spotlight was put on these brands because what just really happened was, they didn't have access to capital. They were chewing into their deposits. They quickly were taking a lot of money out. Obviously, with a lot of the investments that these banks made, interest rates rising, didn't work out too well for the bank either, and it just all imploded. And I will say that, we started, pretty much like Thursday afternoon is when I got the first call from a customer of ours, and then it just snowballed from there, right? So with a lot of the brands that we work with, a lot of what we recommend is that, hey, listen, maybe you don't need to grow triple digits, month over month or year over year. If you scale that back a little bit and are able to actually improve your bottom line, you're actually going to have a business that is going to be more healthy and that you're building to last, right? Not to sell. And I think that's a lot of what the smarter operators are starting to understand is that a business that has the potential to be acquired or have some type of exit event are the ones that are healthy, both from a top line and bottom line perspective.
Yeah. Also, like what I think what we heard from the ground, because we're not on the equity side, is how it affects the actual payment processing part, right? Or how it affects the savings aspect, or the bank accounts of certain brands that were there. I'm not going to list who was impacted. I know one was public, so I'll mention them as a name. Most people on this call probably have heard of AMSAM. They've been around for 5 or 6 years. They had a big chunk of their money, if not all of their money, in SVB, and they weren't able to access their funds. I can only imagine how scary it was for them on Saturday at Expo West when they're trying to take on new accounts, when knowing they don't have access to any of their funds. And if it wasn't for the federal government bailing out that bank on Monday, a lot of brands wouldn't have been able to access their funds. Now, the other problem is that it wasn't necessarily just about having funds. 85% of brands that are Gen Z owned, 85% are on Shopify. Shopify's payment processor, along with Braintree and PayPal, if you use them for payment processing, Amazon Pay, if you're using them for payment processing, checkout.com, a whole slew of them, they use community banks like SVB to hold the cash before it moves and is deposited into your account 5 or 7 days later. So none of those people would have had access to their transactions over the weekends, when traditionally retail is very busy between Wednesday and Sunday. So it could have been a very, very dangerous situation. The reason I bring that up is we, our wholesale marketplace, we use payment providers. Most e-commerce brands are using payment providers, meaning that they're using a third party. I think traditionally, when we think about building out our apps or building out our e-com platforms, we look at the 5-star rating, or we look at we listen to a friend who recommends it. And I think that's a mistake. I think as a founder, what I learned from this is you really need to evaluate every single app, including that one step, that payment processor, or your AMPLA partnerships, and decide how safe is this app? How safe is my money? Where is my money going? Most of this stuff is public on Google. And just to give you an example, there are other options. You can use a payment gateway like an authorized.net, or in partnership with a Google, a JP Morgan Chase or a Bank of America, a safer bank, or your bank of your choosing, instead of being at the mercy of whatever bank these apps choose to use. And so I'm not trying to cause any panic, but what I'm trying to say is, like, it's your responsibility as an owner to do your due diligence and decide which apps, including your payment providers, you want to go with. And there are options that will allow you to choose which banks you're depositing your funds into. And I think from our perspective, that is a really excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, David, sorry.
Just quick point. Yeah, we had a couple customers that were affected by SVB. They banked with SVB, but we worked through things with them. But to Kunal's point, and this is more of a compliment for just the up and coming emerging brands from what I've seen over the past year or two. I'm really impressed with how some of these emerging brands, these startups, right off the bat, have just been more savvy with respect to improving the bottom line and COGS overall. It makes it much more refreshing for a team like ours to help these emerging brands, like from product development to commercialization. When they come in with that mindset already, that like, hey, and I want to be smart about COGS and of course improving the bottom line. Whereas, I mean, a decade or two ago, it was the wild west, especially in the realm of sports nutrition, for example. I mean, in the early 2000s. But yeah, so I just wanted to make that point. Sorry, Mike.
No, it's a super complicated topic, and we can go on for forever. I guess at this point, wanted to be conscious of time, and Adrian, if there's been any Q&A that's been dropped in the chat for any of our participants, would love to sort of let them field that, and then let everyone get back to their afternoon.